Okay, here we go. Yeah.
Goatsi haupa hanut. Dawach aya shapk. Aku mesh hanost taa. Ushrach hanu. Yaka kuka nish hanu. Goatsi haupa. I didn't bring my interpreter, but I have just greeted you in my traditional native dialect, which is Acoma Pueblo in New Mexico, where I am from. I guess depending on which archaeologist or you listen to, we have the distinction of being one of the oldest continuous inhabited villages in North America.
That's okay. I want to just turn it this way so people can see you now.
Okay. And being here at the Rights of Mother Earth Conference in Cochabamba, Bolivia, Pachamama, as our our indigenous brothers and sisters reflect upon the rights of our Mother, the Earth. Amo Shrantnai Ahatsi. Same thing as Pachamama. What the reverence and respect that we show Mother Earth, I have seen in numerous dimensions here at this conference. In workshops, in plenaries, in conversation, and in numerous other forms of dialogue here, as a listener, as a participant, as an indigenous man. It humbles me to be here among a majority of indigenous people. I mean, I've never been to a conference where it's like almost 100% skins, as we say, or 100% native, 100% indigenous, and it just empowers you to be among one of many, and to reflect upon our traditional worldview back home at Acoma, and how it is so similar to our brothers and sisters, not only here of the global South, but throughout the world. The parallels in respect for the Earth as Mother.
And it's also interesting to be in the minority of the English-speaking folks. There are probably four. Well, Spanish is the predominant language, but there are Quechua. There's a lot of other languages that I'm not really familiar with, and that's kind of it's nice to be here. Right. They have some outrageous drinks. I've been having fresh drinks, but I can't even begin to name the names of the fruit. So I won't even embarrass myself with that. But Manny, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your role in North America and the organizations that you're working with.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm here as part of the Indigenous Environmental Network delegation from Turtle Island, North America. I sit as board president of IEN. I also work for my home-based grassroots organization, which is the Laguna Acoma Coalition for a Safe Environment, which is comprised of Pueblo people from Laguna and Acoma. And the catalyst behind the formation of our grassroots organization back home has been uranium mining, which I will reflect on in a couple of minutes. But out of this issue of nuclear power being viewed as a solution to climate change, has mobilized and unified indigenous people throughout. As I can only speak for North America, but I know globally as well. But, since I'm from Turtle Island, and that's where I spent most of my time and concentrate most of my work, in the Grants Mineral Belt, which is in close proximity to Acoma, and which was the largest ore-producing area in the United States from about the late 1940s to the early 1990s. We have begun to hear, beginning from the last presidential administration in the United States, the administration of George W. Bush, and now currently Barack Obama, that nuclear power is green energy. Obama's Secretary of Energy, David Chu, was quoted as making that statement. There's some contradictions here in the United States. On one hand, President Obama closes down Yucca Mountain, the cited area for permanent high-level waste nuclear repository. He closed down that whole initiative. On the other hand, about 2 months later, he came up with $4 billion in projected loans to build nuclear power plants. So the confusion here among indigenous people like myself is, where do we put the waste? If it is a solution, living in contaminated communities, living in a nation that produces some of the greatest percentages of high-level nuclear waste, where do we put it? And as we have seen in recent years, the demand for nuclear power in countries like France, in countries like Finland, Canada, the United States, where nuclear power is a source of energy, we see this revitalization, renaissance, if you will, of the nuclear industry. And due to the fact that the geological formations in the Grants Mineral Belt tell us there's still, tons of uranium mining there, it scares the hell out of us, because we know these multi-corporate vultures, are only there for one thing, the almighty dollar and economic rewards. Meanwhile, the 50-year legacy that we lived from the previous development phase is still not fully addressed, as we have Superfund sites on both the Navajo Nation, in close proximity to Pueblo lands in New Mexico, the Los Alamos National Laboratory in northern New Mexico, which helped produce, the first weapons of mass destruction that were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the 1940s, 1946 to be specific. And we as a nation state in the United States are still the only country in the world to ever use a nuclear weapon. So, for these reasons, we've unified and mobilized a new organization that I work with called the Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment. And this is comprised of populations in the Grants Mineral Belt, mainly in Cibola County, New Mexico, where Acoma is situated. And, the irony of this organization is that we have people involved today who 20, 30 years ago were advocates or pro-nuclear advocates of the industry, former miners, people that lived in communities that benefited from the economics of uranium development and nuclear power. But, the hidden message that the industry, the federal government, our state government in New Mexico, and even our tribal governments, never really informed the working population of the dangers of exposure to these radioactive contaminants in their work experiences as miners, millers, both underground and in open pit mines. Even to a greater extent, we have non-mining populations who have the same illnesses, and never received 1 cent from the nuclear industry. So, we have projected these issues in IEN, Laguna Acoma Coalition for a Safe Environment, Multicultural Alliance for a Safe Environment, as human rights violations. I have continually stated for about the last 16 years of my life that this is environmental genocide. As we began to see about 16 years ago the adverse health impacts to those mining and non-mining populations. So this directs a lot of my work in my life. Another organization that I am a board member of is Southwest Research and Information Center, which has been in existence for about 35 years. And Southwest Research is one of the leading technical scientific advisors that we have in our grassroots organizations. They have helped us with the physics, the chemistry, the hydrology, the geology of fully understanding, those areas of the nuclear fuel chain. I work with numerous other organizations indirectly.
Well, you certainly seem like a busy man, because I know you teach as well. You are also a professor?
Yes, I teach as well at Scottsdale Community College in Arizona, where I teach sociology with an emphasis on the environmental sociology. And I also direct the Indigenous Studies program at the college. So, that keeps me busy. But, most importantly, Govinda, keeps me out of trouble. or we raise hell and start trouble, as we say in this.
Well, they say if you want to go to heaven, you have to raise a little hell.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about what brought you down here, and we'll go from there.
Well, I guess in the early 1980s, I had the fortunate situation to be one of the youth that was invited to participate in what was then the Working Group on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. In a couple of years, in 1982, then the Working Group became the foundation of addressing the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which was just ratified by a majority of nation states of the world. September 17th, 2007 was when the majority, as I said, the majority of nations passed the declaration, with the exception of 4 nation states, those being the United States, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, and which have some of the highest percentages of indigenous peoples in the world. And the threat of invoking human rights for indigenous peoples still seems to be a threat to these 4 nation states, although in recent history, within the last 3 years, we have seen Canada and New Zealand, Australia and New Zealand, with qualifications, considering adopting the declaration. In fact, we just heard from the United Nations Permanent Forum on indigenous issues yesterday, April 20th, that at the forum, New Zealand declared that they're considering passage of the declaration, again with qualifications similar to Australia. So that leaves us with, the 2 bad guys of the world.
Well, I heard today that the U.S. was even considering it. Now, I don't know if that's just a rumor, but then again, the other aspect of all of this stuff is how much teeth is there in actual implementation of the declaration itself.
Right. And, what invoked this discussion was, why am I here at this beautiful place, beautiful part of Mother Earth in Cochabamba? And it's that inspiration as a youth, to begin working on this document, and to see it become a reality, despite the fact that there is concerns about, the document being a shark with no teeth. So, but I think that, the long, tedious process of just getting the declaration passed is a continual effort that, we can't quit after 22 years just because the majority of the countries have adopted it, and we still have, 2 to go. Once those 2 are down, the work doesn't end, and I think that, nation states are very reluctant, threatened to allow indigenous peoples their full rights as sovereigns to invoke the aspects of self-determination over our lands, territories, and resources. So, I think that we have to continue this hardcore lobbying effort, not only at the UN, but in conferences and other forums, international forums where human rights violations, environmental issues, political, economic issues are being addressed, as the Declaration covers all those aspects.
Well, and then that brings us here with this other crisis. I mean, you have the human rights. What was it, 1887 or something, before the first Native American was declared as a human being, some absurd thing like that. And now we're looking at finally trying to get indigenous people as to have human rights. It's just it's bizarre to contemplate, except when you look at the violence that's perpetrated in this whole planet.
Yeah, I agree totally, Govinda. But I think that as you mentioned in your previous question, the U.S. Today declaring that they're going to consider the passage of the Declaration or ratifying the Declaration, it's kind of hard for me to take, when the United States government has a track record, of breaking over 500 treaties, as you said, or 500 treaties, and as you said, only recognizing indigenous peoples as citizens of the United States in 1924. After 500 years of colonization, genocide, invoking law or enforcing laws where we had no free, prior, informed consent over these issues, the treaties were forced upon us as a land grab to steal our land in the United States and Canada, and that track record alone justifies their reluctance to do what's right.
Well, Reds comes to mind immediately when you say about the land grab scenario. And here we are in Bolivia. We're looking at the different changes that are about to happen with the climate and looking at resolutions and ways to do that. You were part of one of the working groups.
Yes.
Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, what the working group was, and and some of the comments and things that sort of put together your final resolution.
Yes. The working group on indigenous peoples was my assignment here at the conference, and Ophelia Rivas of the Autumn Nation in Arizona and Mexico, we were. Ophelia and myself were elected as the English speakers of the council that would oversee the formation of the statement from the working group that will eventually become part of the declaration of this conference that is intended to, as President Morales stated in his plenary address to the conference yesterday, where I don't know. What do you think? Probably about maybe 30,000 people were in attendance.
I heard 25,000.
Yeah, 25,000. That was my guesstimate.
Well, that was the newspaper apparently printed 25,000.
Right, and his point was, we're having to convene this conference because we were ignored at the COP15 World Conference in Copenhagen, Denmark. Indigenous peoples were on the outside looking in, and very limited participation, despite the fact that we are probably the most impacted population in the whole world when it comes to natural resource development and environmental degradation, as these are human rights violations upon us as peoples, and upon our land, air, water, our forests, our biodiversity, the cosmos, and as I heard numerous times in the workshop and in other sessions and plenaries throughout this conference, there's a definite consensus here among the indigenous peoples that we are part of the earth, and we acknowledge the earth as the giver of life, as we are the pitiful five-fingered people, the pitiful two-leggeds, that relies on, we wouldn't be here with the nurturance that the earth provides us. It's so simple, that the philosophies, the traditional-based knowledge that we were taught by our elders, generations ago, and this traditional-based knowledge is still extremely evident here at this conference, and it makes me proud, to hear that there's consensus in that regard.
I think that's astounding, and it's also, I think, we were talking earlier with some other folks about survival, and what can you do and what you can't do, and because I think some people think about their individual survival kind of scenario, when I think it changes with the indigenous traditional knowledge, is that first, your energy is the earth. You are part of the earth, and it's only with the survival of the earth that you exist anyway. So it becomes incumbent upon you to embrace those environmental strategies that enhance the earth's life-giving energy, and then when that happens, then you'll be okay.
Right. I think that you're exactly right. And in the colonial process, when we first encountered the Europeans, that simple philosophy that you just mentioned, they couldn't understand, and they still don't understand it.
They still don't.
Very day.
It's 500 years later.
And the simplicity of respecting Earth as mother. Immediately the Europeans saw that, from their perspective, that indigenous peoples had no concept of land ownership. Therefore, the land was there to be taken. Well, our response to that is, you cannot own your mother. And these artificial boundaries that have been created, drawing lines on the land, that was never part of our indigenous philosophy. The land was held communally, not in private ownership. So I think with those, opposing viewpoints from the indigenous perspective, and issues that we're dealing with here today in the 21st century, climate change is not a recent phenomenon. This is a step process that has been ongoing. Although the scientists will say, in geological time this has happened before and the Earth has recovered, but the abuse by humans of the Earth has never been at the capacity that it is today. That adds to the natural climatic change that occurred geologically, historically in the past, but now we're adding, another dimension, another element to the destruction.
Well, that brings us to the two cosmologies. You know, the Eurocentric mindset where you are an individual separated from the world, and it's your goal to get as much as you can for yourself, as opposed to the indigenous traditional knowledge where you're an integral part of the whole thing. And it seems to me if there is to be some kind of climate healing, if you will, that there has to be a very powerful transition change in culture, and that's going to be, I mean, change, believe it or not, means something different. And so I think a lot of folks have been looking at, making their car payments and getting a new 60-inch television or 80-inch TV or whatever it is. At some point, that's going to be
right.
So how does those things merge into your event today?
Well, that's a good perspective to draw a correlation to, because I think the socialization process in the United States has always been one of consumerism. The old cliche, right? Keeping up with the Joneses, or as you mentioned, material wealth as power, prestige, and the class-based system in America, based upon stratifying the population by how much material wealth you have, And as you were mentioning, in the late 1800s, the United States even passed laws to disallow Indian potlatches, which were known as giveaways, because as indigenous peoples, when we felt we had too much as an individual, what could you do with it except share it with your brothers and sisters, other human beings? And that socialization process definitely differs, from indigenous peoples. And here we are in the 21st century, and you look at the United States, what are we, like 5% of the world's population, and we consume 30% of the world's resources?
I've heard 40.
40, well, it might be even more going down, and that's part of that socialization process that might makes right, and therefore it's no surprise that, like with the Declaration, who doesn't sign on to the Kyoto Protocol, right? The United States government, right? It will threaten our economy, right? It'll threaten our way of life. Well, what about nature's way of life? What about the other 95% of the world? What about their ways of life? It always seems in the United States to be all about us, right? U.S., right?
Yep.
And, this whole...
Usians,
yes.
That's correct. U.S. citizens are referred to as Usians because they use up everything.
Well, we totally agree on that one, bro. And we're sitting here, chuckling and having some laughter over this issue because we can look back on these years and ask the question, how is it that they don't get it, How is it that we have to continually struggle, for the basic human rights that they think that the government and, to a large extent our people seem to think is rightfully theirs, And, the one of the contentious issues with the COP15 is this new, Copenhagen Accord, which tries to brush under the rug the standards that were set at Kyoto, And it to us as indigenous peoples in the United States, we're saying, oh, no surprise, it's just... it's the 503rd treaty that they're breaking.
Right. Well, and then the thing that gets me, it's like you're going at 100 miles an hour, or we are going at 100 miles an hour towards a cliff. and they can't even agree to slow down. It's like, wait a minute, guys. We not only do we need to stop, we need to be going the other direction.
Exactly. So the reflection, as you said, in the working group here today, it takes into perspectives, the opposing viewpoint of consumerism and might makes right to a certain extent, because the many of these indigenous peoples have always been, struggling from the bottom, from the bottom of the well, as Derek Bell said in one of his books on civil rights, that the threat from below, from what is considered less empowered populations, could create an economic upheaval for these developing nations.
Well, it certainly freaked them out so far.
Right. And you know what? The United States cannot accept that developing nations like China and India, from the United States perspective, they become the culprits, but yet, 100 years ago, we used every mechanism in our development process in building railroads and building infrastructure over indigenous peoples' lands in the United States without us ever receiving any legal recourse. Even today on the Navajo Nation, the largest Indian nation in the United States, about the size of West Virginia, that provides coal-generated power from the Navajo Nation for the past 50 years. Meanwhile, we still have 25% of the population. 25% of the population, still living without running water, or without running water, or without 21st century modern day conveniences. So the irony of all this on the Navajo Nation is that they're providing energy sources to LA, Phoenix, Tucson, Las Vegas, Nevada, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Salt Lake City, and yet 25% of the population does not have 21st century infrastructure or conveniences.
Yeah, no running water or electricity at all. I've seen Doda Desert Rock. We were up there when they have 2 coal-fired power plants. They wanted to build another one. Right. And all the local folks had absolutely nothing.
Right. So, some of the people still have to make an 80-mile round trip just to haul water back to their traditional homeland, And
I think the drawdown cone on these mines, you look at the water and the slurry lines and the thousands and millions of gallons that were God, it's hard to contemplate that they would actually take 1 million gallons of water to wash coal 273 miles. Right. As the consciousness of the technology that the folks were using, so Las Vegas could glow in the dark. It's amazing as to so bring us back to the actual event today and what you guys sort of came up with.
Well, we came up with a statement by consensus of the participants, which at certain points was 150 to 200 people. And, what other populations would see as, extremely difficult, or almost impossible to draw consensus among 200 people on such an important document. We were able to do it in, probably, 16 hours, which is not an enormous amount of time when you're speaking about the impact of climate change and global warming on the world.
Well, and also the fact that this document gets submitted to go to Mexico and looking at it on an international treaty foundation of one of which, and the fact that there's so many different participants from so many different countries, languages as well, of all that. Oh yeah. So anyway, bye.
So we're gonna say goodbye to Karen.
Goodbye, Web. Certainly. My brothers, it's been a pleasure to be here with all of you and the listening audience and cover all this well. I'm sure. Tomorrow's another full day.
All right. Well, enjoy your trip and say hello to your family for us. All right. So, people coming and going. Lots of folks moving in and jumping into and 16 hours to pull this. Is the declaration or your declaration, is that available on the web? When will that be available for folks to track
it is currently under review in the conference. I think as we speak, they're concluding the reading of the document.
So you should probably be there
to the plenary. Well, I drafted it, so you kind of pull an old Indian trick, you go hide out for a little, just in case.
Wait till they're finished with all of their throwing stones at it,
and,
so none of them hit you.
Well, we'll face the music when there's still a process tonight where there'll be discussion of input and changes at the plenary, and then we will come back and address final revisions before it goes as the final statement to be reviewed and edited and I guess condensed into one declaration. So, we have 18 working groups here at the conference, and each group will be submitting a statement. So you take all those 18 groups, and we'd have like a 60 we'd have probably 100-page declaration, so some editing and condensing.
16 hours and 100 pages?
When all the working groups, when you take all 18 working groups and you stack their statements on top of each other, so for, as President Morales addressed in his plenary yesterday, his goal is to take the voices and the words and the perspectives of indigenous peoples to the COP16 in Cancun, Mexico next November. So based upon the drafting of these documents in all 18 working groups, then we will have a final declaration that President Morales will hand carry to the COP16 in November, at which we hope there will be a greater level of participation by civil society as opposed to what happened in Copenhagen in December 2009.
Well, and I think that's really the critical point right there is participation by the civil society. And one of the ways that people can participate is starting to do some things and some things to stop doing. And one of the great things that we could all stop doing would be using paper and plastic cups. Bring your own cup, bring your own plastic. We're going to share our magic handshake once again with, let's see if I can get this. Ooh, I just knocked off my screen here. I must have, let's see, where'd Manny go?
Here I am.
Yeah,
well, it gives me time to get a drink of water.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, at some point here, maybe we'll get our camera back. I'm not quite sure why it died. But in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to shift another one over here. We happen to have
more than
camera.
one camera.
So we apologize, folks, for our little thing going south, but we've this is a pretty field operation that happens to be sitting in a building. Mm-hmm. Usually we operate out of a bus and on at location. So anyway, the idea is getting people to do things and to not do things. Civil participation by the civil society, because showing up at one of these things is one thing, and showing your body. But it seems that we're at a point now where we need action that changes this whole paradigm. And what are some of the things? Did you come up with any of that kind of ideas within the context of your what you guys were up to today?
Well,
actions.
I think some of the solutions are again prioritizing alternatives, and where the wind is the source of creating energy, where the sun is the source of creating energy. But we were very astute and cautious in the declaration that, even renewable forms of energy in the corporate structure could be destructive to the earth. We've already known that, some of the big wind turbines have impacted our relatives with wings, the birds. And we have to be very astute to all of nature in these initiatives. And I felt that was a very astute insight by the participants, to call attention that, there's still that imbalance of creating electricity and electrical power. We used to look at hydropower as less destructive, but when you have to displace populations, flood homelands, for again the ultimate kill the fish and other flora and fauna, right? It's amazing how the necessity for our needs as humans today has those destructive elements in even the renewable initiatives.
Right. Well, I think that's the magic of the traditional knowledge base that we're all looking towards. Is that human beings thousands and thousands of years, and it's only been within the last 100 or so that we've had electricity.
Right. Yeah.
Or cars.
Exactly. Right.
Or cell phones.
I mean, and the ever-changing technology, Blackberries and, what next, I mean, it never seems that the human appetite or capacity for more or, faster, people get upset when a computer takes, 1 second to respond to them. Oh, this thing's too slow, I mean, where does it stop, Where does this type of mentality stop, even as environmentalists, you see everybody here with a cell phone, everybody here with a computer, they can't leave that one-eyed monster at home for one day.
Oh, yeah, well, look at me.
Look at me previous to getting on this interview. Where was I? Sitting behind that one-eyed monster, But it's become so ingrained as a part of our life, and I think that at some point there's an ultimate message from the Creator, that we've gone too far, and, self-realization, may be too late, So, as Ophelia Rivas from the Octum Nation said, we're here doing this for our children, for our future generations, How do we want to leave that planet for them, I hope, I'm not a grandpa yet, but I hope to be, and I hope to live to see the day when I'm a great-grandpa, And what's the world going to be like for my great-grandchildren? And that's one of the major reasons I'm here, And I think we lose context of that simplicity by materialism, And, there's a big theme here, that capitalism is the culprit, And I agree, But I think all political systems, have the ultimate goal of control, Not only controlling their population, but controlling nature, Whether it's socialism, or, we all need the same resources, So I think that and
I think that need is, is what we're looking at redefining, is how much less can we deal with do with, and how much do we need? What is a fast? Maybe a electronics fast, and I think John Trudell was once saying, we need to new moons and full moons. This is something we can start right now. Every new moon and every full moon, just disengage and start doing something within your local community. Have a meeting, a gathering, kind of reestablish your connections with your family, your friends, your affinity group, your action organization, new moons and full moons, and start the lunar pulse. We start working with the natural rhythms and powers of things and start recognizing how close we are to that, or how. Yeah.
I think that's a very good perspective. How do we disengage ourselves from so much reliance on power, on electrical power? We didn't have cell phones 20 years ago, and we existed fine. We didn't have these, computers that we can hold in our hand, and we existed fine, this technological age in this postmodern world that we live in,
Well, and I think that's going to be an interesting experience for us to recognize that because you feel it, and as you resonate with that thought in your heart, then other beings feel that same thing. And that these computers and all of this technology and stuff we have is just because we don't believe it ourselves. And somehow we have to recognize that, our elders, traditional knowledge have always said these things, but somehow we've become spiritually... I don't know what the word is.
We've commodified everything in nature, with this new, with the climate. With carbon trading, carbon offsets, carbon tax. The RED initiative. My grandfather told me one time. He said, one day these metroskynas, they're going to think that they can sell the air, and it came true,
Here we are.
They're saying, we can offset, your carbon footprint, if you preserve an area of the Amazon, and if you are emitting pollutants.
Right, but you can't live there anymore.
But you can't live there. But somebody can't. You got to displace somebody, or you can't.
Right,
or
it doesn't qualify for the.
So this mechanism, is only creating, I feel personally, a greater conflict within, putting a dollar value on trees, and as I said earlier, putting a dollar value on air.
On the air itself.
Yeah, on the air itself.
Well, I heard another one that's even more fantastic is that they've now admitted to doing all this weather modification, and there's a university and there's all these studies, and so now they're going to take responsibility for the rain. So if it rains in your area, you got to pay these guys because they're going to say that they are the ones that made it happen.
Right. In the natural world, in the desert Southwest where we live, we still grow corn without irrigation. We dry farm. And it's all reliance on our spiritual connection to the earth, our ceremonies, our songs, even our own identity as human beings is connected to this ceremonial circle that helps the plant, that helps the corn grow, that helps the squash grow, that helps the beans grow, And we survived like that for tens of thousands of years before the Europeans came, Before the Europeans brought delicacies that I love, like chili, from Mexico.
Chocolate. Chocolate was around here.
Yeah, although chili and chocolate were indigenous to, the Western Hemisphere, but even that type of social change, has
the packaging is another thing. It's like when you're growing it yourself and it's in the backyard or whatever, and then the trade scenarios. It's nice to be here to experience some of the markets.
Right.
To see, I don't know if you've been to some of the large markets, but just like a small, your local food market that you have at home, they have markets down here that have everything you could think of. Everything, and sold in the same kind of way. It's just a stall with electronics or clothes or shoes or car parts, but it's all in one. It's a different way of dealing with it.
Right.
Well, Manny, it's Manny Pino. What's a contact or a website that you would like the listeners, if they'd like further information about some of the things that you're involved in and do?
Okay. I think for indigenous environmental issues, one of the most informative sites for all populations is ienearth.org. If you want information, as I mentioned earlier in my interview, on the all aspects of the nuclear fuel chain. As I said, we utilize Southwest Research and Information Center for technological and scientific expertise. SRIC.org, SRIC.org. There, I would also recommend that there are the United Nations site that has indigenous peoples. You can go to all the international documents that we've formulated in this process in the international governmental arena, and that is available for the public through the UN website. What is it? UN for Human Rights. It's UNCHR.org, I believe. But I would just Google United Nations because I'm not sure exactly on that website. But those are some of the better ones in some of the topics and issues and concerns that we're addressing and discussing here at this conference.
All right. And is there any final words that you would like to leave with the folks out there?
Yes, I would like to just leave everyone with the thought that, that the power of the people is the ultimate pinnacle in the direction that we can take at this sensitive part of the earth, of our Earth's history. And to take seriously, even at the individual level, the little things that you can do to limit this destruction to the earth as individuals. If we all took forth initiatives to drive less, to recycle, to use electricity less, the limitations, those small limitations can have tremendous impacts. I would also like to leave the people with our traditional worldview that to destroy the earth is to destroy all living things, including people. Tawa.
All right, Manny Pino. And you've been listening to www.earthcycles.net here in Bolivia at the CMPCC conference. And we're going to take a little bit of a break, and we'll be back probably once